Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's SCVO webinar, A Conversation with Funders. My name is Susan Smith and I'm the Editor of News Services at SCVO, and I'm leading on the Never More Needed campaign. We are joined today by a panel of Scotland's most esteemed purse string holders. We have Neil Rich, Director of the National Lottery Community Fund in Scotland, Carolyn Sawyers, Deputy Chief Executive of the Corra Foundation, and Celia Tennant, Chief Executive of Inspiring Scotland, and of course, Sally Dyson, Head of Digital and Programmes at the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, is joining us as well. Before we get started, I've got a little bit of housekeeping to go through with you all, just to let you know that all webinar participants' lines are muted and will remain so for the duration of the webinar. You can, however, submit questions using the Q&A function on your dashboard. We're really keen to get through as many of the pre-submitted questions and live questions as we can, but we've got loads, so we won't get through them all. So there's also an upvoting element to the Q&A function, so please vote for the questions that you would most like to see answered by the panellists. And if you've got a question for a specific panellist, just highlight who it's for, and that would be great. We'll also have a couple of polls running through the event, and we'll let you know when those are about to pop up. And just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the SCVO website after the event. So before I hand over to the panellists, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a brief overview of Never More Needed for those of you who haven't yet come across it. Never More Needed is a UK-wide campaign aimed to highlight the amazing work going on in the voluntary sector in response to COVID-19. Within SCVO, we are leading within Scotland, and we are documenting all the great work going on, and we're encouraging debate about how the voluntary sector responds now and in the future. And we're doing that through articles in TFN and on the SCVO website, through a social media campaign, and through events like this webinar. If you would like to know more about Never More Needed and would like to get involved, just go to the SCVO website /Never More Needed. Okay, I think, again, before we start properly, we'll just flash up a little poll for you to answer right from the start that will help our panellists think about what it is you most want from them. So first up, what would you most like to see from funders during the coronavirus recovery phase? Either unrestricted funding, a streamlined application process, core grants, quick funding decisions making, or flexible funding criteria. And I can see you all voting live and going up very quickly to core grants. I'm not sure if we're going to have any surprises here really for anyone. Okay, and we have results. And the thing that 30% of people want is core funding, followed by unrestricted funding and quick decision making. Okay, so now I'm going to ask our funders to speak for a couple of minutes about how COVID-19 has affected their organisation, what have been the challenges, what they feel that they've achieved and done well, and what they've learned, if anything. Neil, would you like to kick off?
I can certainly try. Hello, thanks for having me. I think a number of things are important about our response at the National Lottery Community Fund in Scotland. We tried to respond quite quickly when the crisis broke, and work particularly through our own grant holders to be as flexible as we could and as quick as we could, because we knew that was a way to move funds quickly to communities. Since the end of March, we've made about 700 investments worth around £7 million with National Lottery funds into organisations either that already hold grants from us, but also 450 new awards, so small grants in general. they've generally been relatively small amounts of money, which has been interesting in itself, with a focus on food, on connectivity. You know, none of this will be news to anybody really, I think. But also some really interesting stuff, community organisations producing high standard PPE, bicycle delivery of medical equipment, all kinds of amazing stuff. Challenges around that, I mean, I think the biggest challenge that we've all seen is just how precarious systems are, and that's what COVID's revealed. The shift to working home-based, based on sending folk a text on a Monday night and your whole organisation not coming into the office the next day, it's been a real challenge, and I'm really proud of the way our teams responded. I think the things that have been really useful have been levels of engagement, our willingness to be flexible, and the speed of some of our response, and all of that. A lot of that has rested on us being willing and being clear to say that we trust folk, that the people we fund know what's needed in their communities, they know what they're doing, and we trust them to get on with it, and that's what we've tried to do.
Great, thank you, Neil. I'm now going to hand over to Celia from Inspiring Scotland.
Oh, thank you, Susan, and thanks, Neil. So some similar reflections and experiences to Neil. So I think from an Inspiring Scotland perspective, we probably about 2/3 of my team work from home already. So we were very quickly able to sort of get everyone sort of who's not home based up and running. So we didn't really experience any sort of great challenges there. So that was very positive. We're a slightly different funder, and we raise money first before we pass it on to the third sector. So we had a bit of a job in the beginning to seek flexibility from the people that fund us to be able to onward fund, given that circumstances were so significantly changed. So that was a kind of piece of work. The other kind of sort of challenge that we had was actually taking on quite a lot of additional important work. Our day job, the partnership that's been fantastic around the Wellbeing Fund and mobilising that money to the sector, working with government, with SCVO, Corra and Hunter, that's been fantastic, but that was an additional strand of activity. And then we were completely blown away by investors who've funded, private investors who've been alongside Inspiring Scotland for many years, and new investors giving us money to respond to the crisis without actually asking. So we were able to pull about £300,000 together really quickly, which became an emergency response fund. So that's been incredibly positive, and I hope that we can hold on to those philanthropists for sort of future and long-term work. So reflecting some of the challenges that our folks that we have great pleasure in funding, you know, switching online was quite challenging. The pressure that those organisations that we support, who have face-to-face contact with vulnerable people, so survivors, young people, etc., the real kind of pressure of actually really wanting to continue to engage, but actually that being taken away and having to very quickly get online, phone contact, etc. Real concern for those that we fund who we've encouraged to diversify their income by running social enterprises and cessation of that funding stream, and the real concern we have about how do we support them with that, with cafes and support for people in work placements not being there, and really just and the furlough question, which kept coming up in the beginning, about who can furlough and who can't, and actually asking funders about, telling funders some people were furloughed. So that was, thank goodness that passed quite quickly, because that was really quite challenging. So some real challenges for the sector, but as Neil has said, I mean, people that we fund, amazing organisations, way ahead of funders. I mean, Lynn from SCV Hunter said this every time in every call. Guys on the ground, amazing organisations, responding quickly, pivoting, taking risks, doing the right thing for their communities. It's been completely inspirational, and it's been humbling. And as funders, being able to be alongside and mobilise money to make things better on the ground has just been incredible. So thank you.
Thanks, Celia. And now we've got Carolyn who's the Deputy Chief Exec of the Corra Foundation.
Thanks, Susan, and hi everyone. I'm going to echo some of the things that Neil and Celia have already said. So you've got consistency and joined up working from funders already on this webinar. I mean, the Corra Foundation as a team, we've been putting our shoulder to the wheel, during lockdown as others have. I mean, hopefully if folk are grant holder partners of ours. They felt that we've been there for them, you know, supporting and being flexible, which has been priority kind of number one. Corra Foundation's also made some specific COVID-related grants ourselves in areas that we thought might have been missed by other folk. But we've been particularly busy really in the back office of the Scottish Government COVID funds, helping them distribute resilience, wellbeing, food fund and supporting communities, along with some very, very fine partners, some of whom are on this call now. I suppose I feel it's important to say that none of that has been either as hard or as valuable as the work that third sector organisations have actually been doing on the ground to support people. So really funders have been playing, I think, you know, a kind of minor enabling role in what's been an absolutely amazing response across Scotland. We've seen a real mix of impact on organisations we work alongside. So actually for many organisations, they've had to stop, they've had to pause activity, and that's been incredibly difficult. And at the other end of the scale, many organisations have seen their activities increase to quite a frenetic level, actually, you know, particularly in the early days. And people have been working around, as Celia and Neil have said, particularly things like provision of food, family support, advice, signposting. It's all been incredibly prevalent in people's work, as has shifting delivery online, and dealing with loads of practical challenges, finding equipment. And another challenge really has been an almost complete stop to kind of lots of the common forms of public fundraising, and that's had a big impact on organisations. I suppose in addition, just like our staff, people we're working with have experienced personal challenges, the roller coaster of lockdown, you know, different up and down weeks, the challenges of childcare, and just the kind of bigger, I think, the kind of bigger mental impact of living through what is probably the biggest, you know, most global kind of event any of us will ever see, and that's breeding a kind of uncertainty like never before. If I was to look back, I think there's probably three things that funders, at least three things funders have done well in Scotland. The first for me is that most independent funders have given that very quick message about flexibility with existing grants, that it's okay not to do what you plan to do, that timescales will change, and funding can be used for different things. And some like William Grant made big wholesale change towards unrestricted funding. So, you know, and things have worked, quickly as well. You know, Resilience Fund was open very quickly. Secondly, I think groups of funders have rolled up their sleeves and worked together to deliver funds. You know, credit here to SCVO for their hub, which has become a real focus of information and activity, and effectively a single front door to things like the Resilience Fund and Wellbeing Fund. And it's a dead nerdy thing to mention, but I will. But funders and TSIs have been using a shared database to collectively assess and manage the Wellbeing Fund, and that's a big achievement in the funding world. So single front doors, shared back offices, absolutely by no means perfect. We still ended up with lots of different funds accessed in different ways. The third and last thing I want to mention that I think has been reasonably good. Funders have been talking to each other more than ever before and sharing data at a far higher and more practical level. So it's been focused on practical action. Can you help this organisation? Could you publish your grant data? Can we understand together why certain patterns seem to be emerging? And I think that's underpinned by the point that Neil mentioned right at the start. There's this trust really between funders and third sector organisations that's really underpinned the work that we've been doing.
Thanks very much, Carolyn. That's an amazing overview. Sally, SCVO doesn't generally or hasn't traditionally had a role in this area, but it has done over the last couple of months. Do you want to explain a little bit about how that's worked?
Of course. Hi, everybody. So SCVO had quite a small role over the past 18 months, 2 years, in terms of working between funders and voluntary organisations and charities to look at how those things could be done better together and how we could get to achieving some of the things that Carolyn has outlined there, which is fantastic. So I think there are three main headlines as to what SCVO has been doing. So firstly, and really importantly, we listened and looked widely and acted really quickly. So the hub that Carolyn mentioned was a place where there was a huge amount of focus on anything to do with coronavirus and its impact on the sector, and funding was a really broad part of that. I think one of the other things we tried to do was to make everything just a little bit easier for everybody. So to play that sort of smoothing role in the middle, bringing things together. And then alongside that, to push everybody a little bit harder and further than they want it to go, so that we could get really good outcomes for everybody who were doing the fantastic work on the ground. So we created a framework for the different types of funding that were needed by the sector and touted that really widely amongst funders, and everybody galvanised around it, which was fantastic. We had the hub, so that was up-to-date information on changes to funds and brand new funds, so that organisations had that one-stop shop to go to, at least to find out what was going on. As Carolyn said, there was the single front door for funds from Scottish Government, and for the Wellbeing Fund that did include the single assessment platform and grant management platform, which is up, running, still working, and we will be moving forward on. We convened and supported a number of groups around specific funds, and so often went as the sort of messenger between those, so that there were lots of the same messages being shared, and people were then able to collaborate more effectively. And we also convene a fortnightly space for funders to come together and talk and share and collaborate, and Carolyn talked about a lot of the things that were going on there. So I think one of the things that we've done collectively is prove that things that we've been talking about and trying to do for quite some time can be done. And I'm really pleased to report that there's lots of discussion around, so we don't stop now here, we continue forward and we continue building on some of that. So it's around simplification, single front door, it's about gaining that better balance between what funders are asking the sector to tell them in their grant applications, and that due diligence, which is absolutely critically important. And so really focusing on, what do we need to know? Not what do we want to know, what do we need to know? And what are we going to use that information for? And people are sick of hearing me talking about those things. So continuing to push on principles, as Neil and Celia and Carolyn have said, around trust, around simplification, focusing on need, not want, transparency and collaboration. That's us.
Brilliant, thank you, Sally. I'm sure those are all very welcome messages for people to hear, people who are here today. One of the things that I picked up from my chats with organisations and from the questions that were pre-submitted to this event is that there's a lot of positivity in the voluntary sector at the moment in terms of how funders have responded. The speed, the flexibility, the adaptability that funders have shown has been really appreciated. That's not to say everything has gone perfectly over the last few months, but people seem to really feel there's been some really positive things in terms of their relationship with funders. So that obviously leads us on to what's going to happen now. Neil, from the Big Lottery Community Fund point of view, you're one of the big funders in Scotland that everybody looks to. Are you going to do things differently?
I think that there will be things that'll be different. I mean, it's funny that kind of question of what happens after COVID. First of all, we need to figure out when the hell after is. I must say I'm looking forward to it, that's for sure. So for us, there'll be some things that we will seek to do differently about how we do our business. I think we'll try and use tech better. And I have already said I'm never ever getting the sleeper to London for a meeting ever again, as long as I live. You can just have me from the house. Thanks very much. So we'll look at that and how we connect better with communities, but we're also mindful that there will be those who are excluded technologically, and we need to think about how we continue to engage in various ways. I think for us, we'll be thinking about our future model of funding anyway, and I think we need to design a model which enables much better and faster adaptation as a funder. I think often when you design a fund, the temptation is to decide what the world looks like for the next 3 years, and then you plough that furrow. And I think it's clear, one thing that COVID has really made clear is that risk registers aren't worth the paper they're written on, and predicting the future is a mug's game. So for us, I think funding models that are much more adaptable both to local circumstance and to wider issues is going to be important for us. I think there's something for us to try and do to understand emerging and very local forms of organisation and mobilisation. And again, lots of us in the funding world have existed in a place where, you know, homogeneous communities come together, decide they have a problem, form an organisation, sort themselves out a constitution, apply for a grant, and then it's all sorted. And of course, it's all far more messy and far more challenging than that. So I think we need to think about the extent to which our way of thinking about the world and the models we use is actually fitted to the here and now. I think there's some really good evidence of good sort of crisis level collaboration across funders. And I think we all have to have a really honest word with ourselves about the extent to which we really believe we can continue doing that well in a slightly different scenario, because collaboration is an idea that everybody agrees with and everybody's been trying to do for a long time. And so we need to recognise that sometimes it's hard and that we could do more there. And I think as well, one of the things that'll be different for us is a little more challenge back in terms of those who seek our funding. We will need to understand how things connect well and how things work, because there's always more good ideas than there are resources, unfortunately, and that is certainly the case right now. So figuring out how we can do our best by the communities that we're here to serve, how we can make sure that lottery money works as hard as it can, it's going to be important to us. And lastly, I think our guys will just be at home more and traveling less, and that will be a fundamental change to our organisation.
Thanks, Neil. I think that's a big issue in all of this, is that we don't know yet what the need is going to be in our communities post-COVID. You know, we've got no idea about the economic and social implications yet, really, at all. But there's not an endless supply of money. There's not a big, massive pot of gold. And so I'm sure that's one of the things that people are wanting to hear from you guys today is your thoughts on that, which is what brings me to Celia. And following the last recession in 2007, the Inspiring Scotland set up the 1419 Fund, which was a 10-year fund to tackle youth unemployment. And it supported some of the organisations that went on to be the really big success stories of the last 15 years, like Calendar Youth Project, and really helped a lot of young people get onto the employment ladder. So Celia, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, what was good, what wasn't so good, and whether stuff like that could be done again, could it be replicated?
Yeah, I hope it can be replicated, and I think it feels like a bit of history, but it feels a bit like Groundhog Day because we completed the 1419 Fund at the end of 2018, and huge strides have been made in addressing youth unemployment. For us, it's particularly about those young people furthest away from the possibility of a successful future. And we're now back looking at levels of unemployment, youth unemployment, that we had back in 2008 in the economic crash. So I think Inspiring Scotland was established for a number of reasons. First of all, to fund the third sector in a different way, and that was a bit long-term funding, and not just the funding, but bringing alongside those amazing organisations and providing, support to help that organisation be the best it possibly could be. And that we kind of do try and stick to that. Long-term funding when you're not an endowed organisation is a tough gig because you have to go and raise the money first. But so we were formed in response to what the sector was telling us back in 2007. And we created the 1419 Fund in response to a crisis of youth unemployment. And we're back where we were again, not just with youth unemployment as a crisis, but many other aspects of the fragility of society, COVID-19 hitting those who have least the worst. So we had a lot of there's a lot of learning, there's a lot of things that we need to try and repeat. As I was thinking about today, I was really struck by our kind of ability to deliver 1419 was only because we had funder collaboration right at the very beginning. We had people coming alongside, Henry Smith, Esme, Fairbairn, Monument Trust, other big funders who came together and said, we collectively want to fund Inspiring Scotland to do this work. So I'd kind of forgotten about the importance of that, and that gave us scale of funding that really allowed us to crack on and make a difference. And And I would say the learning for us, what worked was the ability to respond to the crisis, have a really strong theme, you know, take people on the journey with us, our investors, find amazing charity partners who just knew the right thing to support young people, using the evidence and evaluation to keep the funding coming in, and supporting the organisations we were able to fund to be the best they could be, you know, whether that was fundraising strategies, whether it was a bit more in evaluation, just being alongside and being able to respond as a kind of enabling partner. And we wouldn't achieve what we did without the commitment of our investors, without amazing young people who took the opportunities in those incredible charities we worked with. So there's a lot of positive things that have been said already that we must not lose sight of, and we must try and repeat. And long-term funding need for it is not going away. It's just quite a difficult thing to deliver. I think we're all committed to it. We need to find different ways of doing that, so that, because that's the way you get lasting change, is if you can be alongside the organisations who've already said they want core funding, flexible funding, you know, on today's webinar.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Celia. And Caroline, how does Corra fit into this? Corra just launched its 10-year strategy this year as lockdown was happening, I suspect. And what strikes me about that strategy is it's very much focused on people and seems to be talking the talk about delivering that level of trust and faith in the charity sector and fundees that they really are asking for, that they really want. So I'm just really wondering, has your thinking changed over the last few months, or are you still focused on?
Yeah, good question, and it's one we've asked ourselves actually at different points. I was just listening to Celia talking there and thinking what good learning actually that was to hear for ourselves. So thanks, Celia. I'm picking up those learning points as well. You're right, Susan. We launched a new strategy. I think it was the week before lockdown, and it feels like a world ago, like when we were all in a room together eating cake. You think now, God, you just. How lovely it would be to be able to be doing that safely. But we launched this 10-year strategy, and part of the reason for that 10-year ambition was to actually get ourselves out of that kind of 3-year loop that everyone, all organisations do, don't we? We sort of write something, it'll last for a year, you spend a year starting it, a year delivering it, and a year kind of working out what you should do next. And so we really committed ourselves to thinking longer term about what we were doing, but that also opened up for us like a strategy that wasn't really about Corra Foundation, but was about trying to play a role in bringing about 3 quite big changes, and we hope, you know, in the world. So, you know, our aspirations were that by the end of 10 years, we would be living in a Scotland where the power to bring about change rested with people themselves, where those people with those radical ideas for change were really well supported, connected and resourced, and that's where funding does come in. And that thirdly, people would be living in a Scotland where people are all working collaboratively together, and in particular bringing the kind of bringing the benefits of both lived and learned experience together to solve some of the really big challenges that we have. As I say, we've talked a wee bit over the last 4 months at points as a team about how do we hang on to those big dreams, you know, like you have those big dreams, and then inevitably in March we all got literally locked down, and most of us in the organisation got locked into doing assessments for the Resilience Fund or the Wellbeing Fund. So at times it's felt quite hard to hang on to those dreams, but actually, without sounding like a spin doctor, actually when we have faced hard, tough points in the last 4 months, we have sometimes come together as teams or small groups, and the principles in that strategy that we worked through, I mean, we spent like a year or more as a staff team working that up, so they're quite ingrained for us, that they were the touchstones that helped us work out what the right thing was to do. And so for that reason, actually, it's made us think, stepping back, that although things have changed, that it's still the right strategy. You know, so we've faced those tough moments, and we've used those kind of touchstones about participation, about involving others, about being flexible and giving the right kind of support, and about trying to see the bigger picture, and that's helped us quite a lot. I suppose secondly, looking at the world now, it feels like a world that's got more challenge and change than ever before in it, and again, it feels to me, as I look at some of those things that have happened, maybe just mention Black Lives Matter, perhaps particularly in that context, that the approach that we are looking to bring about, which fundamentally puts people's voices at its heart, which is about participation and which is about long-term structural change, it kind of feels more right now after those 4 months than even it did before. I suppose the one thing I would say is that our reflection is probably the specifics of that might change. So I mean, obviously we had some whiz-bang ideas of what we thought we might have been doing over the last 6 months, and particular programmes or approaches, and we haven't done that. We've been focusing on COVID-related work. And I think our reflection will probably be that some of those ideas maybe weren't right, but the principles underpinning are still right.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. I'm going to move on to some of the Q&A questions that are coming in, because we're already halfway through our webinar. And the next one I think really is for you anyway, Sally. We've had quite a few pre-submitted questions about basically what's going to happen right now. And this is from Tajesh Mistry from the Venture Trust, who says that he agrees with Neil about when is after COVID. And what do you see the next phase of funding, particularly streams like the Wellbeing Fund? Is that going to happen soon? And will there be further support for organisations for the recovery phase right now, basically? Sally.
Thank you. Tough one. So I think the focus that we're looking at now is around reset and recovery, and working alongside organisations to understand what that really means, because we are part of this twin track where there is still a loss of response, and organisations having gone into an emergency response phase and now having a little bit of headspace to think around, so what is next? We're working particularly on the Wellbeing Fund with partners including Hunt Foundation, who aren't on this call, alongside Scottish Government colleagues, to talk about what is next. And we know that that needs to be done really quickly, and we are working really quickly, almost daily basis, going, so are we there? Do we know what it is yet? And we don't quite know what that is, but something we hope is coming down the track really quickly. And so I would say keep an eye out on the Third Sector Coronavirus Hub, because that's where you'll hear about it first.
Great. I'm guessing, because nobody's indicating they've got anything else to add to that they're maybe not quite in a position to be doing that yet. But I would stress that we've had quite a lot of questions about that, about this need for funding for recovery, basically, whether that's transition from the emergency phase or whether that's emerging need that's going to be coming out as people start to leave their homes and the impact really starts to be felt. I've got a question that was submitted in advance from Julie Christie of Parkhead Citizens Advice Bureau. And she'll be embarrassed that I mentioned this, but I think it is relevant to point out that she is a previous IOF Scottish Fundraiser of the Year, so she has a lot of experience. And what she says is, last year I was involved in preparing 87 funding applications. Applying for funding is often a time-consuming process. The average grant I helped secure last year was under £12,500, and the majority were for one-year programmes. Will funders consider offering larger and longer, ideally unrestricted, grants, which will allow organisations to thrive, even if that means other organisations may miss out? So she's being very direct here. I'm going to go over to you, Neil, first of all.
Yeah, probably is the answer to that. I think two things. We try to offer a range of grant options for folk, because we fund so broadly. Lottery funding is restricted as project funding, and that's a thing that's difficult for us to manoeuvre around. Other funders do have different levels of flexibility on that. In the past, we really tried very hard to make larger, longer grants, which help folk have stability and focus. And as we've kind of pivoted who we fund and how we fund, our average grant has come down in Scotland. But so we'll be looking at how we design our future funding portfolios going forward in the latter part of this year, and we're keen to figure out how we get that balance of options and products right for folk. And the other thing I think we need to try and do more of is think about funding relationships over time, and not just a kind of, you apply once, you get your offer, that's the end of the story.
Yeah, Celia, that feels that it ties in quite well with the Inspiring Scotland model. Do you feel that the message is getting through to your funders about the need for core funding and long-term funding?
Yeah, I think there's a strong desire by funders to be alongside for the long term, and Neil's touched on relationships, and we've talked about trust, and I think these are all really, really important, in the relationship, because we are, we are enabling, we are supporting the money to go to the right place, to do the right thing on the ground and make the difference. So relationships are really, really important, and the flow of money is really, really important. I think there is a finite resource no matter who you look to. We manage a lot of government funding that is channeled through us and goes out to amazing charities. Way back in the very early days of 1419, I think we had a 3-year commitment from Scottish Government, who was one of our amazing funders. We had private individuals, trust foundations, and we had sort of 3 to 5 years commitment there. It made such a difference. And to the point that's been made, by the person who put the question, and sorry, I can't remember her name, we at Inspiring Scotland experience the same merry-go-round year on year, applying. I spent all day yesterday writing to our investors who are funding our new fund, and that's a kind of year on year thing, for me to do as well. So there's no question of the time that is kind of committed by third sector organisations writing applications for 1 year funding that takes them away from the kind of the really important work they do. And we do need to do more to impress upon other funders, ourselves, those in the call, that if we can take a relationship-based approach, extend the duration of funding for at least 3 years if possible, if not more, and use a thematic, approach as well, that would be really, really helpful. So we've still got work to do, but that's set against the backdrop of finite resources.
And I think you maybe have something to add to this, but I thought I would also just point out this question from Martin Colley in the Q&A, which is, does future collaboration mean shared pots of money from core resources as opposed to additional crisis resources? I think that probably fits in well with the question I've just asked. Sorry, Carolyn.
It's all right. I missed my cue there, Susan. Apologies. I just wanted to build on what Celia and Neil have said, and I think Martin's made a really wise point there. And also, I'd never miss any opportunity to agree wholeheartedly with Julie Christie, apart from because I'm terrified of her. Best fundraiser, fantastic. From our experience, I suppose, just to share a wee bit from the Resilience Fund, and I think people will have seen from the Oscar survey as well, and also the TSI survey that came out. I think we need to be kind of reasonably blunt about this, that there's real financial fragility in the sector. Not every organisation, but there are many at the brink, and that's exactly what we've seen over the last wee while. And the truth is, it's really, really hard to build up the reserves that give you more financial security. And the way that for third sector funding works doesn't help. And I'm just going to say that a bit more bluntly than we as funders normally do, because I feel quite strongly about this, that the kind of fragile financial resilience of many third sector organisations has in part been built by short-term project-based funding and by less than cost procurement, which I think is an issue we need to not miss in this. It's absolutely vital that that is named and talked about. So better, or different, improved, good practice around funding isn't the only answer, but I think without a doubt the third sector funding landscape as a whole, and that doesn't mean say every funder needs to do this, but the third sector landscape as a whole needs more unrestricted core and long-term money.
And do you think that might be about sharing resources, creating a central pot?
I think that might be one way to do it, and I think that it's probably a fair reflection, and certainly we've seen that with some of the Scottish Government COVID-related funds, that in reality, organisations, and Julie's, will reflect on her experience on this, are piecing together what they need for their core from lots of different places, and there'll be a more efficient way of organising that. I suppose just to reflect back, and it links to the poll at the start, and I don't know if I'm allowed to ask questions of other participants, but I'll just put it out there into the world anyway. I think one thing that I would find helpful as a funder is to understand in a slightly more nuanced depth what people mean by core, because in my experience it can mean 3 different things at least, if not more. But so sometimes people mean core costs as in my rent, my fundraiser salary, the back office. Sometimes people mean unrestricted funding, so something that I can use for whatever I know is the right thing to use it for. And sometimes people mean long-term, a grant that I know comes in every year and there's a core around which I can build everything else. And it might be that it will mean different things to different people, but in trying to improve our funding landscape for the third sector in Scotland, which we are all committed to doing, I think it's helpful to have those kinds of debates so that we kind of get that right.
That's a really good point, Carol, and I think that's possibly a little bit of research for SCVO to do there in trying to establish what core funding actually is. I've got a really good question that was pre-submitted from Anthea Coulter at Clackmannanshire Third Sector Interface, and this picks up on a live question about funding for infrastructure organisations as well. Anthea's not really asking about funding for her own organisation. She's saying, as a forum of funders, do you feel you could influence change now within the Scottish Government post-COVID to see funding moved by local authorities to communities, if matched in part by your own? So basically, do you have a role in improving the funding landscape for the third sector as a whole? And local authority funding is obviously key to this. Who wants to answer? Somebody wave. Celia.
It's a great question and a challenge. I mean, I think the approach that we've seen work well is where we have worked closely with local authorities. We've been funding third sector organisations in different thematic areas in geographies, and we've made sure that we have let the local authority know. Sometimes we ask the local authority to be involved in not necessarily assessment, but just signing off to make sure that the provision that's going to be delivered is what's needed and in the right place. And in that way, you build a relationship with the local authority, stakeholders and funders, and you create an open door between the person that you're funding, the organisation funding, and the local authority. And that has allowed in a number of areas for relationships to be developed, for trust to be created, for the third sector organisation to be able to show what they can do, and funding has then flowed to those organisations. And so that's been a pretty tried and tested approach that we've taken. So we see ourselves as a funder, and others do this as well, as a broker, as a sort of relationship broker. And the point being that that you can add synergy and value, and you can help the local authority confidently mobilise some of their money out to those trusted local authority organisations, to third sector organisations. So I think that's a really important role that funders can play, and that is about that cross sector work. And I think more so now than ever important, because what I think we've seen happening on the ground is a really quick response by third sector organisations who've been way ahead of the local authority colleagues. And that's not a criticism of local authority, it's just if you're a grounded local organisation that knows the people it needs to support, then you can act quicker, you can take more risks, there's less bureaucracy. So I think there is a role for all of us as funders to, where we have, and we've got the time, just to be able to help make those strong connections between the third sector organisation and local authority stakeholders, because it becomes a win-win, and especially when there'll be finite resources, public sector resources will be finite. We need to get that to where it's going to work, the money where it's going to work best.
Yeah, thanks, Celia. Neil, I think you've got something to add.
Well, it's just to echo a little bit of what Celia's saying there. It's important to remember how important local authorities are as funders and partners of the third sector, and the amount of useful connections, expertise and resources they have. And our teams work at kind of at a local authority level across Scotland, and there's loads and loads of good examples of really good collaboration and support. And I think we need to make sure that we're having those local conversations as well as national conversations if we want to find good solutions, because there are different challenges in different parts of the country.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Neil. Sally, yeah, go on.
Thanks. Completely agree with Neil and Celia. I think it's really interesting to look at it from the other lens, of also the other end of the telescope. The really critical thing is about people in our communities and how they are supported and enabled to thrive, and how we, as independent funders, as local authorities, as Scottish Government, how we collaborate together. And I'm going to use that collaborate word again because we need to push it as far as possible. So thinking about it from that aspect, what are the real needs of communities and people, and what are they telling us? How do we learn and continually learn and galvanise together around meeting those needs and making sure that, you know, every area of Scotland and every bit of our communities are really thriving?
Yeah. On that note, I've got an upvoted question that is very specific, Sally. When the Third Sector Resilience Fund was announced, it was to provide funding for initial 4 months. Is that likely to be extended?
So I'm not the expert on the Resilience Fund, but my knowledge is that it remains open. And as I said before, around the Wellbeing Fund, the focus now is around both what needs to be funded to meet current needs, but also around how organisations need to be sustained. So that whole package of bringing those things together rather than having an artificial separation is something that's been focused on.
Great. One of the other themes that's coming through in questions is about the speed of funding. And, you know, people have really appreciated the speed that funding decisions have been made. There's obviously risk attached to that, but can it be done? Can it continue to be done as fast as that? Can it? What do you think, Caroline?
I think it's a really good question, and sometimes you learn what you can do, and then you have to stop and think. And should we do that? You know, so over the last 4 months, you know, we have been a massive volume of grants made right across Scotland. You know, not just through the Scottish Government funds, but through many other independent funders as well. And a lot of it has been very, very quick. And you know, great lessons from that about, you know, proportionate assessment, you know, due diligence, that trusted people, and sharing of information between funders. I think it's worth just pausing and just thinking what, certainly in the office, we've had a pause and thought sometimes about, well, normally we would spend a bit more time researching this, or normally we would work perhaps more collaboratively with the people who'd be affected by this work to understand if it's well focused. Normally we might not just make some quick decisions ourselves, but we might, you know, try and co-design or involve others in that. And I think those are, we've had points where we've stopped and thought, actually, it's hard to hang on to principles like participation and co-design, particularly when you're moving at speed. And I think it's worth just holding those risks in our mind. I think my own view would be, it would be the wrong thing to move funding entirely to a kind of like turn it around in 2 days kind of option, because of the things that you would miss about a more deliberative developmental process. But as ever with funding, it's not kind of, there's not one size fits all. There's not one answer that is the right one and all others are wrong. And I'm a firm believer that it's a mix of approaches that supports people in the right way, supports not just organisations but people and communities on the ground.
Thanks very much. We've just got 10 minutes left, so let's have the second poll before I ask the panellists to sum up and give some top tips for you as voluntary organisations. So, has your relationship with your funder got better or worse since the coronavirus pandemic started? If it's better, slightly better, stayed the same, slightly worse, or worse. So far, nobody's saying worse, which is a really good sign. And we seem to be erring towards the better end. If everyone could keep voting, we'll get a conclusion for the panelists before we ask them to sum up. So we have 39% of people said their relationship has got better, 33% said slightly better, and 24% said stayed the same, with only 4% saying slightly worse. So to be fair, I think that shows a resounding success for Scotland's funders, and I think the funding community should be very pleased with it itself. But that still leaves us with these very, very big challenges ahead, which we've been talking about, and the fact that organisations out there really are worrying about whether or not they're going to survive COVID-19 themselves, and what the next few months, the next 2 months, the next 6 months, the next year are going to bring. So I thought I'd ask you all to finish up with a few reflections on what you think voluntary organisations could be doing to put themselves in a position to be funded and to be supported to help the people on the ground. One question that was pre-submitted from Martha Lester-Cribb from Evaluation Support Scotland points out that there is a flip side to the flexibility, which is that a lot of organisations are worrying about when they're going to be asked to report on what they've been doing over the last few months and what level of the reporting they're going to be asked and how they're going to be held accountable for that. So, you know, if there's any sort of words of reassurance you can give to voluntary organisations or any advice you could give them on how that's going to pan out over the next few months, that would be great. Yeah, so just your finishing thoughts. And we'll just go back in the same order and start off with Neil.
Thanks, I mean, I can get all the easy bits. First things first, on that reporting concern, we said we trusted folk and we meant it. So don't worry too much about that reporting concern. We will work sensibly with you, because in the end, as funders, we want to understand what happened, and we appreciate that that's difficult, and we understand the pressure people are under. And I don't know anybody I've come across in the funding world who said the thing they're really worried about is getting every box filled in on every monitoring report backdated for 3 months. So by all means, you know, keep doing sensible stuff, and I'm sure you'll be fine. You certainly will be if we fund you anyway. What to do next? What's the best thing for voluntary organisations to do? The best thing for any voluntary organisation to do is to do the thing that it considers most important for the community of people that it serves, and that will continue to be the case. So I've always thought that really in grant making, what you need folk to do is tell you a sensible story about what they want to do and why they want to do it. And those stories will be eminently more sensible if they're told from a position of engagement and inclusion, with an eye on the future as best as we can. We expect things to be a wee bit up in the air. We expect folk not to be able to tell us exactly what's going to happen in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. But we also know that well-organised, well-managed, thoughtful organisations who are talking to the folk they work with will be able to ride those waves better than most. For us, the extent to which local people can influence and lead your organisation, the extent to which you are connected within your community, and in an ideal world, the way you can build on the strengths and gifts that people have are really, really important, and I think they'll continue to be important in our funding. So I would say do all those things, and mainly I would say talk early, talk often, talk to our funding teams, whichever kitchen table they happen to be at anywhere in Scotland, and we will seek to help folk navigate sensibly through what I appreciate, despite years and years and years of trying to make it simpler, can be a bit of a maze.
Brilliant, thank you, Neil. Celia, what are your top tips?
Top tips. Well, I think I'd written down it's the compelling story. I think and it's interesting Martha from ESS asked the question, because it is really about organisations who know best what's needed on the ground, being able to articulate the story and provide the kind of evidence of need. And so really the top tip is actually just kind of being able to provide the evidence, the impact, the change that you can make on the ground, because ultimately that's what the money is all about, is actually for is for the organisations funded to be able to make the difference they want to make. And it seems a simple thing to say, but sometimes it doesn't quite sort of come back to the funder in the way that it's intended. So really sort of get a strong story of the change that you can help people, the opportunities you can create for people, and the change that you want to see, and the evidence that you're the right person to do it. We will do our absolute best as an organisation to make whatever funding available to amazing organisations that we have at our disposal. And we want to do that on the basis of building a relationship and a trusting relationship, and providing flexibility. There's an issue that we don't often talk about, and we probably don't talk about enough, which is about power, and actually the kind of money being the powerful thing. And I think in the early days of our relationship-based approach, that people were concerned to tell us about what was going wrong. Tell us what's going wrong. Actually, if things are not working out and we need to go to plan B, we want to have a conversation about it, because there's a good reason for that. So trust and relationships are really, really important, and being able to tell a really, really strong story about the change that you can help make for the people that you want to support.
Thanks, Celia. And that's one of the reasons why Never More Needed is here, to help you tell those stories. So once again, go and look at the SCVO website to find out more about that. Carolyn, what are your final thoughts?
3 top tips for me. The words I have in my head are collaboration, voice and power, actually, echoing what Celia said. So firstly, collaboration. For me, there are tough times ahead, and I mean tough times for people and communities, and maybe tough times in funding too, but I think there's a imperative to make best use of the resources that are available, and the best way to do that is through organisations collaborating, whether it's in their place, whether that's for their community geographically or a community of interest, working together to make sure that funding and resources are as well used to make the biggest difference that they can. Secondly, voice. I think keep telling the stories of the people and communities that you're supporting and working with. At the end of the day, that's such an insight, but actually the real importance is in strengthening their voices to tell those stories for themselves, and ensuring that those voices are wide and disparate, and include young people, includes BME communities, include people with disabilities, so really challenging ourselves as a sector to strengthen those voices and to amplify them. And then thirdly, I think about power, and I would say that the sector needs to be strong in its own voice, and it's probably necessarily, but perhaps it's a shame sometimes orientated towards government or sometimes funders as the answer, and actually the sector has an incredibly powerful voice and can say what it needs, but also is a powerful sector, is a powerful, capable and rich in resources and experience and capability sector, so to feel the power of the sector.
Brilliant, thank you, Carolyn. Sally, what would you like to finish up with your thoughts?
So I think firstly, focus on people that you're supporting and what's important to them and what really matters for them. Really learn from the past 4 months and think about how that learning can help you move forward. Things are unknown, but there's lots of learning that we can take forward from that, and keep learning and keep iterating that. Work in partnership to enhance resilience for local people. And I'm going to add a 4th one in, which is around just keep talking to SCVO about your experiences with funders, because it's only with those experiences that we can do our work with funders and move things together in a way that we need to be doing. So yeah, get in touch, please.
Brilliant, thank you very much. That is us at the end of our hour. So I want to say thank you very much to Neil Rich, Carolyn Sawyers, Celia Tennant and Sally Dyson. And thank you very much for everyone who joined us and for submitting such great questions, both in advance and on the day. As I said at the beginning, this is a series of webinars. If you've got any feedback about this webinar, or if you've got any ideas for future webinars, please do get in touch. And the best place to get in touch with is events@scvo.org.uk. So thank you very much for joining us, and off you go and have a nice lunch now. Goodbye.